Are we going to have a quorum?
We actually do not need a quorum for this meeting because it's a special meeting.
Oh, okay.
So we are waiting for our Chair Edwards to be here to lead the conversation, but if we don't have quorum, that's okay.
Now,
Hi, Chair Edwards.
the revenues. Last year and this year. I haven't started that. Okay, we have time.
We are ready to go whenever you are. We do not, Chair Edwards, we do not have to do all the formalities that we typically would in one of these meetings because it's a special session. So we can dive right into the meat of it, or we can do a roll call. It's up to you.
We can dive right in.
Okay, you are a co-host, so I can also share screens if you just tell me how we can be helpful. We have last year's recommendations and we have this year's budget ready to go if you would like to see those shared.
And Kelly, you didn't send this year's recommendation, did you?
No, that's what this meeting is for, is to determine this year's recommendations. It's just there's a budget that was included in the original packet from DES with the amount of money that's available.
And we didn't get that one either.
Yes, that was attached to the original invitation. I can send it again if you'd like.
Oh, okay. Oh. Or you can show them.
Kelly, maybe what we should do is first, if we if we have the like the one spreadsheet that has the past years, and then we can talk about the dollar amounts. Maybe just if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen on that one.
Sure, hold on just 1 second for me.
Super. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this special meeting. We'll use the time accordingly so that we can make sure that we stick to the time that we have here for the next hour.
Okay, can you all see that okay? I'm going to make it bigger.
I can see it just.
I see it.
Okay.
And then
So there was some, can I interrupt for just 1 second, Chair? Pardon me. There was some question previously about the other years that were not easily seen here. The reason for that is because they're hidden. So if you want, anyway, that information does live, it just lives here. So if you want me to expand it all out, I'm more than happy to.
I would leave it up to the group. Would you like to see more than just the past year? Would you like to see additional years, folks?
If we're printing it, can we do that same thing where we can expand to see prior years?
I'm sorry, Mary Lynn, I had a hard time hearing you. Can you repeat yourself, please?
If we have a hard copy of that chart, can we also go in there to see prior years?
I can show you on the computer, sure.
Chair Edwards, this is Karen. Yes, I actually opened my own Excel spreadsheets that were sent and I have them open.
Super. So yeah, folks, if you have these as well, you can just unhide the additional years if you're looking back at this yourself. Thank you, Kelly, for doing this. Okay. So in the process, you know, I think what we want to really what we want to accomplish today is, what's our philosophy? Why are we moving forward with, recommendations in the way that we are? And maybe briefly, Kelly, do you, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, do you have the time frame? We did go over this in the last meeting, but if you wouldn't mind walking us through this way, if other folks didn't hear, they understand why we're having this special meeting, and it all goes back to timing.
It sure does. Thank you, Chair Edwards. So we will take your recommendation today, your recommendations today, whatever's decided. They will come to the official regularly scheduled Human Services Technical Committee meeting next month for a vote. The entire group will either vote yes or no on this. And then from there, the recommendation will go to the Human Services Community Initiatives Committee for a vote. And typically those are voted in, no problem, historically. And then from there, it will go to Management Committee and Regional Council just as an item of discussion. They will not vote on it. And then the recommendations will go back to DES and will be implemented for next year.
Okay, so part of this, everyone, is because of the alignment for all of those meetings and getting it back to DES in the time that they've requested for us, coming together now so we can make a recommendation. Because when we come to the meeting, our next regularly scheduled meeting, we won't be able to kind of kick the can to our next meeting, because then we won't be able to make sure that our recommendations are heard by those, the other MAG committees before getting to DES. So that's why we're collected here today, so that we can review Kelly, the amount that DES has provided to us. Can you walk us through what they have shared with us thus far this year?
Yes, I can. Let me pull up that document. Give me just 1 second, please.
Thank you. So for those who are new, while Kelly's bringing that up, for those who are new to the Social Services Block Grant recommendation process, there is, for the SSBG funds, there is just a portion that is provided to MAG for our recommendation. The majority of the funds are managed by DES, and are the recommendations, they handle that internally. So we just have just a piece of the funds that we provide feedback to DES on, and they are in 4 major categories. So the first one's adults, families, and children. Our second ones are senior population, and then the third one is persons with disabilities. There is a fourth category, which we have not funded recently, and that was for DD.
Sorry, I thought you guys were looking at the one I was looking at and you weren't. I apologize.
No problem.
Here we go. It's like, wow, she's doing a really good job of describing this, but they can read it. No, you couldn't read it. I was sharing the wrong thing. My apologies.
No problem.
So this is the budget we received from DES for this year. And I think this difference column is probably the most important to focus on from last year. So this is last year, what we decided, and this is what you all decided, and this is this year's budget.
Super. And so, Kelly, if you would just scroll down a little bit for us. So that's a difference. There's an increase of $92,000. So, really in what we're doing based on those four categories, primarily the 3 that we have invested funds into. Do we continue funding? There's a couple of different ways in which we can handle this. Do we continue funding in the same way, add additional funds in specific categories? Do we go ahead and take that 90 odd $1,000, put it into, like, split it out differently. Or of course, we can always take a look at another strategy of how we're going to provide the levels of support into the 4 major categories. So first, yes, Mary Lynn, go right ahead.
Well, when you're ready for recommendations, I can talk to the elderly. Do you want me to go ahead and do it now?
Go right ahead, Mary Lynn.
Yeah, so you know what happened because of the pandemic, there was a huge expansion in Maricopa County, well, and statewide, on the number of people that were receiving home delivered meals. The federal government relaxed the rules and regulations, and so they weren't as strict on who could get meals, and we created what was called pandemic meals. So if someone was food insecure, because they couldn't go to grocery store, they went to grocery store, the shelves were empty, there were long lines, they were afraid to go out because of COVID. So what happened was this past fiscal year, we actually went from about 750,000 home delivered meals to 1.4. So almost doubled the number of home delivered meals. I just feel like food is the highest priority, much higher than having home care where someone comes in and cleans and does your laundry and does some other kinds of things. And so I would, one, it would be great if we gave the surplus extra 90,000 for the home delivered meals, but I would like to see money from home care transferred into home delivered meals. We're going to have probably about a $250,000 deficit. And so what it means is we may either have to close to new clients in home delivered meals or, really cut back. We have already cut back a lot on people that were getting mom's meals. And so to me, that's a higher priority than a home care. One other thing is the legislature, we've been advocating for several years strongly, and the legislature has given us an additional home care money statewide. And so I think the priority needs to be the meals.
Thank you, Mary Lynn, for that. A follow-up question, because since with the those pandemic meals that they were provided to people who typically would not under SSBG be provided those meals. So I know that you shared the dollar amounts of increase, but all of these additional funds, all of those people still wouldn't be able to be served. So have you guys determined how many people would actually be eligible under these guidelines for home delivered meals?
Well, we are in the process. I know Leah. We have a plan in place to to do things well, like on redetermination. We're going to make sure that they would still qualify under regular meals, non-pandemic. But we still are getting, we normally were getting 40,000 calls a year to the 24-hour senior helpline. This past year, we got 63,000. So the number of people calling, emailing, needing, food is still high. Also, and then I know, but with the increased cost in food, you probably all know that food stamps were cut during the pandemic. People were getting like $75,000 a month, and food stamps are now getting like $17, $18 a month. And we're getting a lot. We do food boxes and all that, and people are saying, I don't have food, I don't have money, that type of thing. Well, I'm sure Jacqueline, that you have to have two deficiencies in activities of daily living, one of which is that you can't prepare meals. So I would say with the county's sale case management, doing all the redeterminations and I think that we're still going to be in need of home delivered meals money. It's just the fastest growing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Lynn. Susan, yes.
My recollection from these conversations over the years is one thing that we've asked DES to provide that for whatever reason, it seems as though either I'm not seeing the right documents or they are not providing who are these funds going to? Who are the providers? I know that we've asked in the past, not only to who are the providers, but what have the providers done with the funds? Are there any performance metrics? You know, are we getting bang for buck for these? That said, I'm going to echo what Mary Lynn has said. Our experience with the senior centers and just with the contracts that we've seen is that the meals really are, they continue to weigh heavy on our seniors. And as much as I love many of the other strategies and many of the other services, they do kind of come secondary to people actually receiving nutrition. So, but back to the first question. Do we know who the providers are?
For home delivered meals, it's each of the senior centers. City of Phoenix, of course, you use Celrico. We contract with the City of Phoenix, and then you subcontract the meal prep and delivery.
Right. So
Before overall, Kelly has some backup on this, and I can provide some additional insight too. So go ahead, Kelly.
I will say one of the issues that we've faced in the last 12 months in managing this project, because that's my experience, is there has been inconsistent leadership over this work at DES. It's been handed off several times. And so we have asked for that more than once. We have not received it. We will continue to ask for it. I think that making these decisions with performance outcomes makes a lot more sense. But to answer your question, Susan, I do not have that information for this year.
And part of the reason why I'm asking is I'm just going to be fully transparent. As an entity that indirectly, may receive some of these funds. They might go to the Area Agency on Aging, but they might then subcontract them to the City of Phoenix. I don't want there to be any misrepresentation that we are, padding our pockets or anything along those lines. So I do want to make sure that, I'm not understanding why DES, I understand that DES has had a lot of turnover, no problem, but it's a pretty basic, straightforward question. Who have you contracted with? So I'm a little disappointed that we still don't have that.
Yeah, this is something that we've literally struggled on the entire time that I've been on this committee. So I think this is the 9th time that I've done SSBG funding. Maybe it's the 10th, I don't recall at this point. And every single year, and there's been different folks that have had the responsibility. But I know even, with Kelly's predecessor, and even when Amy St. Peter was just specifically managing this process too, we're not able to. So I know each one of us are, data-driven individuals and wanting to make the decisions based on good information and information that we should be able to receive from DES. And, I'd ask Kelly to continue to ask. And at this point, yes, we'll continue to ask each year. And as committee members, I think we have to just expect we are not going to receive that. And if we ever do in the future, it will be a pleasant surprise. I know one thing that they had communicated in the past is because of how the funds, how SSBG is determined in the state, that we just have a small piece compared to, how they make distributions amongst the different DES divisions for services. I think that complicates it because it's not just this responsibility of managing and collecting from the COGS that it's not in an actual program division. Whereas the distribution of funds and that contract management is pushed down to the programs and service divisions, you know, whether it's DAWs or DCAT and you know, the others and in the department. So we'll have to move forward and make decisions, unfortunately, without all of the information that any of us would want. Mary Lynn, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think something to point out to everyone is that SSBG is a very critical fund source for us and many of the social service agencies, but it's only one of many fund sources. For example, in home delivered meals, our budget's almost 4.4 million. So the SSBG from AG only represents about 10%, but that 10% is really critical because we're using Older Americans Act, state dollars, providers also, local providers put in match. So I think that's why it's going to be hard to get hard data on how SSBG, who does SSBG fund, because I think almost every single program has multiple fund sources, even like homeless. They get some SSBG, but they get this money and that money and ARPA money and whatever. So it's going to be hard to say our SSBG funds served this number of clients.
Well, and Mary Lynn, to that point, and I won't belabor this, I'll make one more comment, but because there is so much federal funding that's out there, that's the one thing that I was a little bit sensitive to, is that are there areas that are not otherwise being picked up by ARPA funding, that this SSBG would be able to truly, fill a gap. But I'm okay to move on.
Yeah, and there's ARPA funding in it, but we have to all remember the ARPA funding ends in September of 2024. And so we need the sustainability of SSBG.
And it just depends on how the funds are allocated, because if they're obligated, they can go till December of 2026, Mary Lynn. So, you know, depending on how local jurisdictions and the state are managing that, it could certainly be extended for key activities. So we have one proposal in to take this excess funding of the $92,000 and to specifically put it in home delivered meals for seniors. Are there other items from the committee members that they are interested in sharing perspective on, or support for, or a strategy that any one of you are looking for? I'm happy to.
I just have a question.
Yes, Melanie.
So I know obviously at one point we did do stuff with people with disabilities, but then it was zeroed out again. Are we still saying that category does not need any funding support?
In home delivered meals?
In any of the services?
Since I've been around a long time, I think that DD felt that they had lots of other support from, like, if you follow the legislature every year, they get millions of dollars additional. I think they're going after another 10, 15 million coming year. So if I recall, that what they said was that it was not as significant to them.
And that's what we had heard in the past. I just want to confirm that's still accurate, because I mean, granted, if 60,000 versus if they're doing, getting 10, 15 million, I'm sure this is harder to keep track of, or apparently we don't keep track of it. I am thinking I could do a public records request and someone would have to tell me something, but I'm just saying, I could do it for you. Mary Lynn, I know I actually volunteered to be a home delivered meal driver, so I do recognize the importance of the program and what it does. I was curious, I know that most of the senior centers, I think it to some level are trying to bring back congregate meal program, but it's a kind of a slow rebuild on that, pretty tough. So I think, I definitely still see the heavy need for it going out into the community. So I don't, I support, that kind of directive as well, just because I do think that is a pretty vital service. I know even being a volunteer and checking in on folks and seeing, what's going on. It's one of those touch points for their day that I've had some interesting ones that I've had to make some calls and follow up because you get a little worried about them. So, and again, I know that especially it's going to take a little while for some people to either transition back into the on-site programs. And I know that there had to be a look at who still qualified and what that looked like, but there's certainly definitely, I think, the need in that area.
Thank you, Melanie, for that. Other comments from the committee members?
This is Renee with Peoria. I'm kind of torn.
I have a question and actually two questions.
Karen, I'm sorry, Karen. I think Renee started, but Renee, you're
sorry, Renee.
I do agree on the meals, that those are very, very important. But one of the things that we're seeing.
We can't hear you, Renee. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think your microphone is not working properly. You sound like you're talking from the next room over.
Okay, I don't know how to fix that. I'm on a different computer.
If you want to put your comments in the chat, we would be able to read them at least.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you. I apologize.
Thank you. Karen, while Renee is typing that out, if you want to share what you were going to say.
Sure. So I might have missed it, and my apologies as I was throwing up these Excel spreadsheets, but the 2023 local plan level column that we see, who actually put that forward and how were those calculations made? Was that a recommendation from the state based on prior recommendations in prior years, or because it looks like it could be proportionate, but I'm not quite sure. I haven't done the actual calculations, but there seems to be nominal increases in each category. So I just want to know from the beginning, where did that come from?
My understanding is they took the total amount increase, which was the 92,000, and then did a percentage across the board for each.
Okay. All right. Thank you for confirming that.
Yes. And this is the category that
Right.
you all are deciding on today. This is just a recommendation.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay. And then my second question is actually a clarification to Mary Lynn. When you are making a recommendation to redirect the 92,000 to home delivered meals, would that only be for those in the elderly target group, or should we also consider home delivered meals for those who are non-elderly but have disabilities?
You could do either. The category is ELD, so it's elderly and disabled are lumped together. So it's so it does include people less than 18. I mean, 18 and over. And so the ELD stands for elderly and disabled. So the people less than 60 are eligible for SSBG meals.
So you don't actually need the category that the PWD home delivered meals, that's like line 22. That one isn't really necessary since you get to kind of lump them in ELD.
Yeah, they don't come from a different fund source. It's one program.
Okay.
I know we're waiting for Renee's comments. Jerry, I see you took yourself off mute.
Hi there. Yes, if I may, I just had a couple of things to add to the conversation. Mary Lynn had mentioned the rise in cost of food. And so I think that we definitely need to consider that, not just for the home delivered meals, but also for the congregate meals. I know that in our senior service center, it has been a real challenge, even for the congregate meals. It's really, we've actually had to go back and ask for additional funds in order to cover food costs. So I just want to make sure that I echo what Mary Lynn had said about there is a definite need for that home delivered meal service, and we've seen an increase across the board. And I would agree that we'll continue to see that pretty level. But I just don't want to neglect the congregate meals as well, and the need to increase some funding there as well.
Okay, and then for this, for everyone's, for this process, that other category, unlike you do see for persons with disabilities, congregate meals, in this process for elderly, the congregate meals are lumped into the adult daycare, adult day healthcare. That includes the meals that are provided there.
Yeah, and the other thing I would want to tell you, Jerry, is that the Older Americans Act, which is about a third of our funding, has a title C1, and Congress has put tons of money into congregate meals. And that program has not really grown. I know that your expenses have grown, and so we will try to be responsive to that. But in terms of the home delivered meals has grown so much, and the federal funds haven't kept pace with the tremendous growth in home delivered meals.
Thanks, Mary Lynn. I'm going to go ahead and read Renee's comments. So Renee says, I do support home meal programs, but we are receiving a lot of calls lately from seniors struggling to stay in their homes with rent increases and health issues and reduced supports. So I know how important it is to have other supportive services in their home. And with housing prices where they are, keeping people in their homes is less expensive. I might be in support of a partial increase for meals. Thank you, Renee, for those comments. So if I'm understanding, no, I would certainly, we're seeing this in multiple levels as well, that, you know, the increasing home delivered meals, certainly as a piece of the additional funds that we have, but also taking a look at the whether it's the home care housing support services in the elderly category, so that seniors can, you know, additional funding so that they can remain living safely within their homes.
So a follow-up question on that, in that category with housing support services, does it allow to help pay rent and utilities? Is that an allowable expense within that category?
My understanding that it is, those are like the piece of rent is not in here. If we're going to be looking at rent, then those are other, actually in the adults, families and children, but those other supportive services to keep people in their homes, like personal care and whatnot. So.
Well, and that looks like, I mean, so I see so there's a category that says the chore, home health aid, personal care, respite nursing.
Yep.
So when they talk about the housing support services necessary, I guess, what specifically is that?
So those are other community-based services that are brought into the home, so that rather than someone going into assisted care or whatnot, like that they can remain living independently within in their home.
Well, okay, so how is that different than the providing home care category?
Oh, are you talking about, oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your.
Yes, what's the difference between, if we're saying like, what then specifically would it be an example of housing support service? Because I can see the home care piece category.
That's great question. I'm not sure if that's the physical changes that may need to be made to the home. And I'm trying to look on the, yes, thank you so much. You read my mind, Kelly.
Could it be the case management for basic needs? I think that's where we see some of the crisis situations. And I know it's across the board, kind of what Renee is hearing. It's not just our elderly, it's our families, it's individuals with price increases. It's getting harder and harder for folks to just be able to make rent payments and get food on their tables. So when I think about that one, I think based on the description, that's kind of where it would fit in. But this is, again, my first time doing it. So I don't know if anyone else is more familiar with this.
That is, Eliana, that is exactly where it fits in. And when we've changed the budget before, we have put it into basic needs when we're looking about those supportive type of services, rent, and et cetera, that would impact populations, across the board.
And I don't know much about this, but I don't know, between Jacqueline and Susan, don't community action programs have money for rental and utility assistance that comes from the Department of Housing that is available to help people with rental and utilities?
So great question. And I'll share my perspective, and then Susan, you can jump in and say we're of the same coin on this one. But no, we don't. Right now we have, there is one-time funding available through the federal government, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. That is one time, it's limited. Many of our agencies have received it directly, but someone has to be behind on their rent. The difference is the funding that community action agencies receive more on an annual basis for rent is much more limited. The benefit, though, and difference in what we have in the other categories is that the federal program is really specific on who is eligible and having key criteria meet, including like the past due rent and eviction. And there's more flexibility with SSBG funds that an agency can use for rent and or mortgage assistance. Susan, do you want to share your perspective on that?
No, I'm on the same page with Jacqueline. I think what she says is accurate to the extent that we have funds and we're not running out of funds. So many of us are actually running out of funds. The federal funds in most circumstances for many of us as grantees are going to be expended by the end of this calendar year. DES will still have some funds beyond that, but there's not necessarily a prioritization for seniors per se. So that's a little bit challenging. And then once that federal funding is gone, Jacqueline's right, it kind of goes back to an SSBG being a little bit more flexible than some of the limited funding that we might have that could can assist seniors with rent.
So can I ask if someone knows about SSBG can it be used to pay for things like rent and utilities where, yes. Because like I know Older Americans Act funding cannot be used, has to be for services and not for paying of individual financial shortfalls.
Yes, yep. Yes, it can be. It's protecting those who and the vulnerable, and so including in how state policy is written and provided to us. There's prioritization and review of seniors, of families who have young children. So focused on those key vulnerable populations, so that it's mirrored after very much like the the federal utility assistance that we receive. So, Melanie, did you have a question?
Well, so with that being said, none of this funding is going towards that, is what I'm hearing, is that we're not allocating anything that supports that interest that Renee and Eliana mentioned, is that when that type of funding source is needed to be used, it's out there, but it's not in our pot of money to determine where it goes.
No, it's actually in the basic needs. So
Okay,
that's why, like, our biggest bucket that we have, that $1.2 million, it's in basic needs. And so that can be used in a variety of ways. That's used for case management, that's used for those support services. That's
okay, so that gets me back to what are we using that the housing support services, what is that supporting at the tune of this last fiscal year to 348,000? What did that do?
So these are supports for, as my understanding is for those who are experiencing homelessness and part of the senior population. So this is homelessness and seniors together, which is, I would recommend that we're not changing that that level. The senior population who is experiencing homelessness has increased.
Okay, so it's because it says to locate and maintain a home. So do we know who does this? That's what we don't know still, because we have no idea.
No, we don't know how all of that is. I am think how that's being, this one is probably being managed by the Division of Community Assistance and Development in DES because they're the ones that manage the homelessness programs, and it's probably braided with the rest of the funding that they have for homeless services. I know they have put money, RFPs and money out into the community specifically for the senior population in partnership with ADOH. But I don't know that 100. I don't know that 100%. I am just figuring that just like we are on the other ones. So we have a couple of suggestions here so far. We have suggestions in using the additional funds for home delivered meals, as well as for basic needs. Is there any other? And also I did hear Jerry also saying about congregate meals, which would fall in that adult day healthcare line item. So is there any, I see we're at 312, so want to see if there's any discussion of any other specific categories before we move into the actual allocation of discussion of allocation of funds.
Can I add something anecdotally, Chair?
Yes,
From
please.
that perspective, to echo some of the other comments of members of the committee, we have received a significant increase in the number of calls coming to MAG from older adults on fixed incomes who are being pushed out of their homes because of rent increases. And we have seen some cities actually set up specific housing voucher programs for those individuals because their service needs are so different from a chronic homeless individual who may be waiting for care down at CAS. It seems, I don't want to be overly emotional and dramatic about this, but it does seem horrific that we're basically having a conversation about food or shelter here.
It is, and it's not over dramatic, and it is horrific that we're having this conversation in the first place. You're exactly right, Kelly. Karen?
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
I'm just studying last year's sheet, the look back sheet. And there was another area that we had actually increased last year while we were still pretty much at the height of COVID. And that was the area under elderly to provide increased in-home care to keep individuals in the home. I'd love to hear some input from others regarding whether or not we need to maintain it at that high of a level, or if that's something that we should consider maybe stepping back a little bit and focusing more on the basic needs of food and shelter.
I would say from the staff who are working with clients, we have, Mary Lynn can certainly share from the area agency, we have very, very long wait lists in all of these categories. So the cost to keep it, data and the cost to keep folks living independently and safely in their homes is it's one, better for individual health, and it is much more cost effective than trying to get someone to go on to Arizona long-term care, which is a very extensive process, and most of the time people are denied. So which then when we think about those social determinants of health, then now they're falling, they're getting hurt, whatnot, they're going into the hospital, and their lifespan may be or the quality of life. So I mean, I would certainly say having continuing to have a significant amount of funding in that category is important.
I would make another potential recommendation for us to consider, and that would be, I hear Kelly's concerns, and I think it's horrendous that we're at a place where we're having to have conversations about food versus shelter. And I do think that every situation is on a case-by-case basis in terms of the needs, and recognizing the recent report that just got released. I'm sure many of us heard it on the radio or on the news last night, how we are the 38th. We are ranked 38th in the nation in terms of rent increases. Every scenario is different. I would advocate that we split this 50-50 or at some proportion, so that we're not saying one or the other, because we need to factor in all of the circumstances.
I would thank you, Karen, for that, the splitting the 50-50. I would also make a case in removing funding from two categories, and this is because additional funding that's coming in the state, and I've heard from just in a presentation today from between Access and ADHS in pushing funds out there. So in the adults, families, and children, that for high-risk children, as well as for the pregnant and parenting youth, for us to scoop out of SSBG. Access has a significant amount of funds from SAMHSA that is going into high-risk children. And so I think the funds that we've allocated here are really de minimis compared to the millions upon millions of dollars that are going into the system. And that if we take the 42,000 in the one category and the 37,000 in the other category, and along with the additional 92, then we're able to really take that and split those in between the home delivered meals and the basic needs, and so that we're focused again on what we've heard here on making sure that people continue to have food and shelter.
Chair, to make sure I'm understanding you correctly for the notes,
Yep.
So it would be these two categories that you would recommend
Yes.
us decreasing, to take that additional funding over to food and shelter for seniors?
Yeah, so then yes, we could split, there's a couple of different categories that we could split it into, but so taking our additional 90,000, adding the 37, adding the 42, and then deciding what the splits between meals and housing needs are. So I'd like one, how does Renee says I would support what Jacqueline is suggesting. I think that moves money to the greatest needs right now. Is there any, oh, go ahead, Melanie. Yes, please.
Well, just looking back at that category, so I know in talking with like our school districts, and I don't know that how this gets used, but the crisis shelter services for children. So I know that there are a lot of youth on their own. And so is the funding that's currently there, do we know more specifically how that gets used in terms of, I know there's a lack of place for youth on their own, and they don't have, the shelters, and there's a lot of kids, like some of them have lost both parents to COVID, things like that, and they don't necessarily have kinship. Do we know specifically how this can get utilized? Like, can it provide more shelter space for youth?
Not in my understanding of that. Not in those two categories.
Well, that I'm just saying, like, if you took the money from the case management and the counseling and put it in the shelter piece, would it help improve shelter opportunities for youth? Because that is extremely lacking right now, is the high level of shelter for youth on their own.
If we're talking about those youth who have aged out of the system.
No, they're under 18. They're actually just youth. They're under 18.
I don't know if that is focused on, I know it's not focused on those who have aged out of the system. I do not know if it's how that's going to manage with Child Protective Services. It appears maybe in the service intent that it very well could, but I don't know.
That, I know that's a need.
I would just like to add that I agree with a portion of what Jacqueline has said in terms of that we should be putting money toward those categories that we're seeing the highest need in, such as food and shelter, right? And the shelter categories or / housing categories, should I say, are broken up. And I think we should consider all of the different housing categories, where at the same time, I'm a little hesitant to pull all of the funds from the case management and the supportive intervention categories, just because we don't know where exactly, who exactly is going to be impacted, what agencies receive this money currently, that sort of a thing. That's what I'm worried about, is like, what's going to be the impact? Whereas I hear, yes, there's other dollars that can be utilized for this purpose. What will be the domino effect if we pull that money?
Sure, that's a great point. A great point, Jerry, to have made. So we are here in our final 10 minutes. I'd like for us to get to the point in which we can have a recommendation that we share back with the full committee in our next meeting. So first, if we could, I think we've, what I have heard everyone, and speak up if I have heard incorrectly, that we want to take the $92,000 or whatnot, the extra funds that we have for this year, and not split them up accordingly, but put them in key categories. Super. Okay, great. We have that. If what I have heard is there's a couple of different categories, and what I'd like for us to do is first talk about, like, let's narrow down the categories and we can talk about percentages really quick. If there's anything else that we want to do outside of that $92,000 or $90,000, then we can do that secondarily. So I have heard home delivered meals. I've heard housing support services. I have heard basic needs area. We've talked about some additional shelter services. I will tell you, I would recommend we do not put anything else into things that are other than maybe the elderly housing support services on the line items for shelter services, there is a significant amount of money out there right now. And I think our small amount of funds that we have can go into some of the other categories and make a bigger difference. I mean, honestly, in the 92,000 isn't going to go as far as the, like tens of $1 million that are being actively put into things like emergency shelter services, into those two categories. So.
And I don't actually disagree with the shelter piece for adults. I do think there's a lack for youth. I think that's a very much lacking. So I guess I'm getting confused on, I can see our 3 tabs, the DCS, the DAAS, and the RSA. Are we only dealing with the tab of the DAAS right now?
Yes, that's all. Yes, that's all we're, and I think for us, again, we've talked about home delivered meals. We talked about the elderly home delivered meals, the elderly housing support services. We also talked about basic needs and then the elderly adult care. Other than those 4, is there anything else that someone would like to add into there?
I just wanted to ask a question. Do we know who the housing supports for the elderly? Do we know what is done with that? We don't get that. I think someone.
No, we don't have that information. Like I said, my suspicion is that is managed by one division in DES, and they put out RFPs for funds. So I'm guessing that is where it's going. There has been funds issued for shelter services and other support services specifically for the elderly and persons with disabilities. But I don't know for sure. Jerry.
The other category that I would like to propose that we consider is the housing support services for homeless individuals and families, due to the nature of the wording. So it talks about not just locating, but also maintaining a home for those individuals and families. And so again, it's all the words, but I'm wondering if that could go toward rental and utility assistance potentially, because it's maintaining their home.
Sure. Okay, so thank you, Jerry. I'm going to, we have 5 categories. I'd like to hear if we want to keep those 5 categories, or if we want to minimize, like or to, take one out. So we have adults, families, and children, basic needs, adults, family, children, housing support services, elderly home delivered meals, elderly housing care, and elderly adult daycare that could be with the congregate meals. Is there anything else? Or are any of those we want to remove? Okay, I'm going to take that. We want those 5 categories, and a recommendation is that we could take the 90-odd thousand and split it evenly between those 5 categories. Other suggestions?
I would be in support of removing a percentage of funds from the DCS work page, the 38,000 and the 43, just not zeroing that out. So I just wanted to propose that some sort of percentage that we can then shift funds over.
Jerry, do you have a percentage that you're recommending?
Be 10% out of each of those categories.
All right. Is anyone opposed to taking 10% out of those 2 categories?
What were the 2 categories?
Those were the adults, families, and children, the oh goodness, Jerry, if I'm wrong, tell me please, the pregnant and parenting youth and the supportive intervention guidance counseling.
Case management and then the supportive intervention guidance. Yes, those are the two.
Pregnant parenting, yes, super.
I think my only concern is you get to the point of how much of this is worth it to them to manage. I mean, I'm looking at the tab, the RSA tab, which I know we're not on yet, but when I look at how much money they have to deal with, is it even worth them getting it? When you're looking at like $1,000, which is on a different tab, but even this, you start, I don't know. And I guess that's the question is when does it become?
Well, we haven't, I understand, and we certainly haven't had that, any kind of feedback. So you're right, and I have no idea. We are at top of, we're at the end of the, Kelly said she expects this braided funding, and it's probably right, Kelly. We're at 3:30. So what I am suggesting, based on our conversation, taking 10% out of those two categories, adding that to our $90,000, and then splitting it evenly between those 5 other categories. And then bringing that, go ahead, Melanie.
Well, you had mentioned removing all of it, right? Because you felt like you have heard that there's a lot of different funding source, or they're getting some influx from other sources that it could make sense to actually zero them out versus them having another source that they have to keep track of, versus if they're getting a whole new funding source or a larger amount.
Yes, that's something I suggested. We heard from Jerry and some other concerns. Both Rachel and Jerry said that they had concerns of removing the money in totality. And so we had, Jerry offered 10%. If someone else would like to offer a different percentage for reduction, Melanie, do you want to?
Well, I guess if our concern is that we don't know, I know when we zeroed out like the disability piece, it was because we had noted and gotten word that they felt they had different sources, had enough, and didn't want to use this. Is there any way to get that information from this group who received this funding to see if we can zero it out?
I don't think, we can certainly go back and try, but I don't think, as Kelly had shared before, we don't have that level of detail from DES. And when Kelly and the rest of the team at MAG has continued to reach out, it's, it's non-responsive. So I don't know that we're going to get that level of detail. Go ahead, Kelly. Oh, Kelly, you're on mute.
Sorry. I would just note, I don't know that we can move funding between these categories. I think if we decrease case management and supportive intervention here by 10%, we're taking that money and we're putting it down here in crisis.
No, Kelly,
No?
we're allowed to.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you.
No, it's okay. We're able to completely move it from one category to another.
Okay.
So,
I'd either rather zero them out versus, I don't know that a 10% difference makes enough bang for a buck on the other side, and then this side I'd either do all or none almost.
Okay, so we have Jerry and Rachel who had shared that they did not want a complete removal. I hear from Melanie, yes. Karen, do you have a comment on this?
Sorry, but how clear are we on the certainty of this additional funds for the case management and supportive intervention? Is that already a done deal, or is that something that's still in conversation?
So it's a done deal. They've already received the funds from the feds. They have RFPs out there.
Okay.
And Jacqueline, this is for this fiscal year, FY23?
Yes.
Thank you.
If that has already been penned, then I would recommend removing with the understanding this is why, just so if there's any pushback or concern, we have that well noted for our own edification for future years, as well as for those who are going to be reviewing these recommendations going forward, so they understand that rationale.
Okay, so we sort of have 2 and 2. I'd like to get some other folks who are on with us now to share their perspective before we have the final dollar amount. And I will tell you, I'm trying to get us wrapped up quickly since we are 5 minutes over. Any other comments on whether
Yeah,
zero?
yeah.
Yes.
So this is Susan. I'm going to echo. I think Melanie and Karen. I'm comfortable with the amount of funding that is otherwise being received by DCS. I think it's okay to move all of these funds over to our other priority areas.
And I agree. I liked the statement that Karen said, making sure that we make note of this so that this is something that we can remember for next year in case that additional funding from these other sources doesn't come through.
Thank you. Okay, so that would be a majority of us here present. So we will remove the line items 9 and 10, remove 100%, add those dollar amounts to the additional 90. Thank you, Renee, for sharing that you support. Add it to the $92,000 and then split it between the 5 categories evenly. And if there's no other comments, then this is what we will bring to the full committee and officially vote on at our next meeting. Okay.
Hey, sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah.
So if we look at the tab, the RSA tab, are we looking at that money too?
We are looking at that money too. Yes.
And so that's people with disabilities.
Yes.
And so again, you have one line item is $2,000, one is $42,000, and one is $2,600.
Yes.
That just seems really small.
It certainly is. Are you proposing something on this one, Melanie?
Well, I mean, again, it just seems like a hard number to keep track of. It's pretty small. I don't, again, whether they track it or not, and I don't know how much of a difference it's making. I don't know what their other funding sources are. I personally would rather take like this type of funding and actually move it to the DCS and the child crisis if it got us more shelter for youth. But, you know, I don't know that that'll help them enough either. So it's just weird to only have like $2,000 in a line item.
I certainly agree with that one. For line items 9 and 11, how does everyone feel about removing those two and then adding them to our full amount of funds? Jerry supports. Anyone else?
And this is zeroing out rehab services.
Yeah, line item 9 and line number 11.
Yeah, I can agree with that because it's such a small amount.
I mean, either that or roll it into their supported employment. I mean, keep it in this category, but put it all in one line item. So
I agree.
I would rather just eliminate 9 and 11, just roll it into number 10, just so that they have something for this population group, but it's a little like a tad more robust.
Okay. I think that's, I think we're in a agreement there. And that, oh yes, Karen?
I agree with Melanie to just keep it within the same category, but keep it focused on one particular activity where we can make hopefully a greater impact. I do believe several years ago, the state had cut some supported employment, I believe. I It's kind of what I remember, but someone else may have more current history. But nonetheless, I just feel like it's easier to manage those programs and have a stronger effectiveness for that population in one category versus spreading it out so thin.
Yeah. Okay. Kelly, do you have enough direction from us to prepare the documents for our next meeting?
I do, Chair. What we will do is we'll go back through the recording. We'll make sure that we captured all of the changes that you are suggesting. We'll come back to you with a summary of this meeting, including an updated Excel spreadsheet. We'll have you review it before we go into the next Human Services Technical Committee meeting, and then it will be on the agenda to vote. We will also summarize your rationale for why the changes were made.
And
Okay.
we'll have that in a couple weeks before the meeting so we can review it.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for your time. Sorry for the additional 10 minutes, but appreciate everyone's thoughtfulness today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Good discussion.
Appreciate
Bye,
your help
guys.
very much.